It's Monday morning, August 17th, and Indiana is still trying to figure out how bad this actually was. The water is going down in some places now, which sounds like good news, and in a way it is. But behind that retreating water is a state that just lived through one of the worst flooding events in its recorded history, and the full cost of it is only starting to come into focus. 7 people are confirmed dead, tens of thousands of homes were damaged or destroyed, and in some parts of the state, the flooding hasn't even peaked yet. So if you think this story is winding down, it isn't. Stick with me because I'm going to walk you through exactly how we got here, what's happening right now, and what's still coming for communities that haven't been hit yet. Let's rewind to where this actually began because it matters. On August 11th, a fast-moving line of severe thunderstorms, the kind meteorologists call a derecho, tore across Iowa, ripped through northern Illinois, and slammed into northwest Indiana. Wind gusts hit 99 miles an hour in Gary. Tornadoes touched down in the Chicago suburbs, including a community called Lansing, Illinois, where local leaders are still pleading for federal disaster aid days later. That storm alone knocked out power to roughly 250,000 homes across the region. But that was just the opening act. What came next is the real story. For nearly a week straight, Indiana got hammered with rain that would not let up. Some areas in the eastern part of the state picked up over 11 inches in under 3 days. To put that in perspective, that's close to triple what Indianapolis typically sees in an entire month of August, dumped onto ground that was already saturated and had nowhere left to send it. So instead of soaking in, the water went straight into creeks, straight into rivers, and those rivers exploded past anything they were built to handle. The first place to feel the worst of it was eastern Indiana, around towns like Cambridge City and Newcastle and Henry County. Early last Wednesday morning, water rose so quickly that people described entire blocks disappearing under it within hours. Longtime residents, people who've lived there their whole lives, said they had never witnessed anything close to it. The National Weather Service issued flash flood emergencies there, which is the most urgent flood alert that exists, reserved for situations where people's lives are in immediate danger. That's not a phrase used lightly, and it tells you how fast and how violent that first wave of flooding really was. From there, attention shifted to the White River, which cuts straight through the Indianapolis metro, and this is where the flooding became historic in the truest sense of the word. Up in Hamilton County near Noblesville, the river crested at a level that broke a flood record that had stood since 1930, over a century, gone in one weekend. Local officials called it exactly what it was, the worst flooding Hamilton County has ever recorded. Roads vanished underwater, the wastewater treatment plant was submerged, and entire neighborhoods had to evacuate. Downstream in Indianapolis itself, the situation got just as serious. Areas like Ravenswood and Rocky Ripple saw mandatory evacuations as the levees protecting them strained toward their limits. In some neighborhoods, 3 feet of standing water sat where streets used to be. The city's fire department carried out dozens of water rescues in a single day, pulling people and their pets out of homes by boat. National Guard vehicles rolled through residential streets. One apartment building near the river had to be evacuated overnight after flood erosion put its structural integrity at risk. Here's the piece of good news buried in all of that. As of this morning, the White River in Indianapolis has actually crested and started to recede. City officials reopened the floodgates on Sunday, and Hamilton County leaders described Sunday as the first genuinely good morning they'd had in days, water going down instead of up. But officials are still urging caution because a receding river doesn't mean a safe one, and plenty of roads and neighborhoods remain damaged or inaccessible. Now, if you're anywhere south or west of Indianapolis, this next part is the one you need to actually pay attention to. Rivers don't just flood and stop. When water rises in the upper part of a watershed, that surge travels downstream, hitting community after community over the following days, sometimes over the following 2 weeks. So while Indianapolis and Hamilton County are starting to breathe, that same wall of water is now rolling toward towns further south along the White River and the Wabash River, places that in some cases haven't even crested yet. If you live along those river corridors, this flood event is not behind you. It's still in front of you, and you should be watching river forecasts closely over the next several days. Let's talk about the human cost, because that's ultimately what this is about. At least 7 people have died across the state since the storms began. A 4-year-old boy in Jennings County was killed when a tree came down on his home during the initial windstorm. In Delaware County, an 18-year-old named Matthew May, who had just graduated high school and was preparing to start at Purdue University, died after he and 3 friends went into the flooded river Wednesday night. The other 3 were rescued, but Matthew wasn't found until days later. Also in Delaware County, a 58-year-old woman named Stephanie Sally was found dead in a cornfield alongside her dog, not far from her car, after investigators believe her vehicle was swept off a flooded road. Additional deaths were confirmed in Lake Porter, LaPorte, and Henry counties. Each one of these was someone's family member, and several of them died the exact same way, attempting to drive through water that looked passable and wasn't. That pattern is worth repeating because it keeps happening. It takes just 6 inches of moving floodwater to knock an adult off their feet. 8 inches can move a car. 2 feet will float it away entirely, current and all. Floodwater is almost always deeper and faster than it looks from behind a windshield, and no shortcut home is worth the risk. If you come up to a flooded road, any flooded road, the only correct move is to turn around. On top of the flooding, there's a second, quieter emergency running in parallel that doesn't get nearly as much coverage. While northern and central Indiana were drowning, southwestern parts of the state have been baking under an extreme heat warning, with heat index values climbing past 105 degrees. Now layer that on top of widespread power outages. As of Sunday afternoon, roughly 130,000 to 150,000 homes and businesses across Indiana were still without electricity, down from a peak of nearly 300,000 right after the initial derecho. That's people with no air conditioning, sitting in triple-digit heat index conditions, some of them elderly, some of them medically vulnerable. The utility handling much of the hardest-hit territory in the Northwest says it expects to have around 90% of customers restored by Tuesday night, with full restoration targeted for Friday. Crews have been working around the clock, and in one especially frustrating incident, restoration work in Gary had to be temporarily paused after a utility crew's vehicle was struck by gunfire, forcing the company to coordinate more closely with police before sending workers back out. There's also a hazard that's easy to overlook once the water starts receding, and that's what's actually in the water. Emergency management officials have confirmed that floodwater across the affected areas is mixed with sewage, gasoline, and other contaminants. Wading through it or letting kids play in it isn't just unpleasant, it can genuinely make you sick, causing everything from skin irritation to respiratory problems. Treat any standing floodwater as contaminated, full stop. So what happens from here? The immediate Indianapolis area gets a bit of a break today and tomorrow, with drier conditions expected to help rivers keep falling and give crews a real window for cleanup and debris removal. But that break doesn't last. Forecasters are already flagging Wednesday as the next day to watch, with a real chance of additional heavy thunderstorms rolling back through on ground that is still completely saturated. That matters enormously because it wouldn't take much new rain at all to send already stressed rivers spiking again, potentially undoing days of recovery in hard-hit communities. So here's where things stand in one clean summary. 7 confirmed dead across the state. The White River in Indianapolis has crested and is receding, floodgates reopened, but downstream communities are still bracing for their own peaks in the days ahead. Roughly 130,000 to 150,000 customers remain without power, expected to be largely restored by Friday. A federal disaster declaration is active, FEMA assistance is flowing, and the National Guard remains deployed. New storms are possible again as soon as Wednesday, on ground that has no capacity left to absorb anything more. If this affected you or someone you know, please stay off flooded roads, no matter how familiar they look. Follow every evacuation order the moment it's issued, and check in on neighbors who may still be without power, especially anyone elderly or medically dependent. This is not over yet for a lot of Indiana, and I'll be back with the next update as soon as conditions change. Stay safe out there.